History remembers armies. It forgets the one man who stopped them. These 36 warriors did not wait for backup. They were the backup. One Simo Heihe was a Finnish farmer who became the deadliest sniper in recorded military history. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in 1939, he walked into the forest with a rifle and spent 100 days killing over 500 Soviet soldiers in -40-degree temperatures. He used iron sights instead of a scope so he could keep a lower profile. He packed snow in his mouth so his breath would not create visible vapor. Soviet commanders sent counter-snipers and artillery strikes specifically to kill him. Nothing worked. In March 1940, an explosive bullet hit him in the jaw and took off half his face. He survived, regained consciousness on the day the war ended, and lived to 96. He was asked if he regretted his kills. He said he did what he was told. 2. Shiho Dun was a Chinese general serving Cao Cao in the 2nd century, who during the Battle of Xiapi, took an arrow directly to the left eye mid-combat. He pulled the arrow out. His eyes came with it. According to historical records, he looked at it, declared that it was the essence given by his parents, and could not be thrown away, placed it in his mouth, and swallowed it. Then he killed the man who had shot him, and kept fighting. He went on to serve as one of Cao Cao's most trusted commanders for decades, losing the eye but apparently nothing else. He died of natural causes in 220 AD. The story is recorded in the historical chronicle Sangguoji. It is either the most metal thing a general has ever done, or the most metal thing anyone has ever done. 3. Audie Murphy was 18 years old when he enlisted in the United States Army, and too small to pass the physical requirements for the Marines and paratroopers who rejected him first. By January 1945, he was 20 years old, standing alone on a burning tank destroyer in Holtzwihr, France, operating its .50 caliber machine gun against an advancing German company of around 250 soldiers while calling in artillery strikes by telephone with his other hand. The tank beneath him was on fire and could explode at any moment. He held his position for an hour. The Germans retreated. He had been wounded earlier in the battle. He received the Medal of Honor. He returned home and spent the rest of his life struggling with what he had seen. He became one of the first public advocates for what we now call PTSD. 4. Lashiman Gurung was a Gurkha soldier stationed in Burma in May 1945 when his position was attacked by an estimated 200 Japanese soldiers. The first grenade landed in his trench. He threw it back. The second he threw back. The third exploded in his hand, destroying it entirely and wounding him severely in the face and body. With his remaining hand, he loaded and fired his rifle through the night, holding his position alone after his 2 companions were incapacitated. By morning, 31 Japanese soldiers lay dead in front of his trench. He was found still at his post. He received the Victoria Cross. He survived until 2010, living long enough to fight a legal battle against the British government for equal pension rights for Gurkha veterans. He won that too. 5. Miyamoto Musashi fought his first duel at 13 and killed his opponent. He fought his last at around 50 and won. In between, he accumulated over 60 recorded single combat victories against some of the most skilled swordsmen in Japan, often arriving late, carrying improvised weapons, and defeating opponents who had spent years preparing specifically to kill him. His most famous duel was against Sasaki Kojiro, a swordsman so skilled he was known as the Demon of the Western Provinces. Musashi arrived hours late, carved a wooden sword from his boat oar on the way, and killed Kojiro with it in seconds. He never held a formal position, never commanded an army, and spent his final years in a cave writing the Book of Five Rings, a treatise on strategy still read by military commanders and business executives today. 6. Scaeva was a Roman centurion serving under Julius Caesar during the siege of Dyrrhachium in 48 BC, who single-handedly held a gate against an overwhelming enemy force while his unit retreated. By the time relief arrived, he had taken approximately 120 hits from arrows and javelins. One arrow had embedded itself in his eye socket. He reportedly pulled it out himself and continued fighting. His shield was so damaged it had to be retired as a war trophy. Caesar publicly rewarded him with double pay, 200,000 sesterces, promotion, and public recognition. He used the story in his own writings as an example of Roman military virtue. Whether the 120-hit Ghetto count is precise or embellished by decades of retelling is unknown. What is documented is that Caesar considered Scaeva's stand significant enough to record personally. 7. Leo Major was a Canadian soldier who in April 1945 single-handedly liberated the Dutch city of Zwolle overnight. Armed with a submachine gun and grenades, He spent the night attacking German positions, killing the local Gestapo chief, setting fire to the SS headquarters, and creating enough chaos that the German garrison concluded they were under major assault and withdrew by morning. He then walked to the German lines under a white flag and told the commander to leave or be destroyed. The commander left. The city was liberated without a single civilian casualty. When Field Marshal Montgomery offered him the Distinguished Conduct Medal, Major refused it, saying Montgomery was not worthy of giving it to him. He had already refused a decoration once before for similar reasons. He died in 2008. Zwolle still celebrates him every year. 8 Crazy Horse was the Oglala Lakota war chief who personally led the charge that destroyed George Custer's command at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. He never signed a treaty. He never allowed himself to be photographed, believing cameras captured something essential. He surrendered in 1877 not because he was defeated, but because his people were starving and freezing, and he had no other way to protect them. He was killed at Fort Robinson in September 1877, bayoneted by a soldier while allegedly resisting imprisonment. He was in his mid-30s. No verified photograph of him exists. No recording, no grave marker that has been publicly confirmed. He left behind a military record that West Point instructors have studied, and a name that has outlasted every institution that tried to erase it. 9 Diprasad Pun was a Gurkha soldier on sentry duty in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, in September 2010, when approximately 30 Taliban fighters simultaneously attacked his checkpoint. Alone, he fired over 400 rounds, threw 17 grenades, and detonated a mine. When he ran out of ammunition, he picked up his machine gun's tripod and threw it at an attacker who was climbing onto the roof. The attacker fell, the assault failed. He was found standing alone, surrounded by the evidence of what he had done. He received the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross. When asked about the tripod, he said he had no choice. He had run out of everything else. In 2012, he became a British citizen. The Taliban attack lasted less than 15 minutes. It felt, he said, like much longer. 10 Leonidas was the Spartan king, who in 480 BC led 300 Spartans and several thousand Greek allies to hold the pass at Thermopylae against the Persian army of Xerxes, estimated at anywhere between 100,000 and 300,000 men. The Greeks held for 3 days until a local shepherd named Ephialtes showed the Persians a mountain path that outflanked the position. When retreat was still possible, Leonidas sent most of the allied forces away and stayed with his 300 Spartans and roughly 1,100 Thespians and Thebans. They died to the last man covering the retreat. The delay gave Greece enough time to organize the naval resistance at Salamis that eventually defeated Persia. The inscription placed at Thermopylae read, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie." 11 Khalid ibn al-Walid was an Arab military commander who began his career fighting against the early Muslim forces at the Battle of Uhud and ended it as the greatest general in Islamic history. He converted to Islam in 627 AD and never lost a battle again. He fought on multiple fronts simultaneously, defeated the Byzantine and Sassanid Persian empires in rapid succession, and developed tactical innovations that historians compare to Hannibal and Napoleon. He fought in single combat against enemy champions repeatedly throughout his career. He was eventually removed from command by Caliph Umar, reportedly because his military reputation was becoming larger than Islam itself. He died in bed, which he considered a source of personal shame given the life he had lived. His sword arm reportedly bore the scars of dozens of individual duels. 12 Henry Johnson was a Black American soldier from Albany, New York, who in May 1918 was on sentry duty in the Argonne Forest when a German raiding party of approximately 24 men attacked his position. His partner was wounded immediately. Johnson fought alone, firing his rifle until it jammed, throwing grenades until they ran out, and then fighting hand-to-hand with a bolo knife for nearly an hour. He suffered 21 wounds. He killed 4 Germans and wounded several more. The French army awarded him the Croix de Guerre with a gold palm, their highest military honor. The United States Army gave him nothing. He returned home, developed severe PTSD, became unable to work, and died in poverty in 1929 at the age of 32. He was awarded the Medal of Honor in 2015. 97 years after the battle, 13 Geronimo was not a chief by birth. He earned his authority through combat reputation alone, which made what he did between 1881 and 1886 even more extraordinary. With a fighting force that never exceeded 50 warriors, many of them women, he evaded and outfought the United States Army across the deserts of Arizona, New Mexico, and northern Mexico. At the peak of the campaign to capture him, The army deployed 5,000 soldiers, 500 Apache scouts, and the resources of 2 nations. He surrendered in 1886 when his people were exhausted and starving, not when he was defeated. He spent the rest of his life as a prisoner of war, attended the Louis World's Fair, rode in Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade, and dictated his memoirs. He died still technically a prisoner in 1909, never having been allowed to return to his homeland. 14. Jack Churchill was a British Army officer who holds the distinction of being the only soldier in World War II confirmed to have killed an enemy combatant with a longbow. He carried a Scottish claymore sword, a longbow, and a set of bagpipes into every operation he participated in, on the grounds that any officer who goes into battle without a sword is improperly dressed. He captured 42 German prisoners in a single raid armed primarily with his sword. He led assaults playing the bagpipes until the shooting started. He was captured in 1944, escaped twice, and on learning that the atomic bomb had ended the war, reportedly said that if it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years. He later took up surfing. He was entirely serious about all of it. 15. Yogendra Singh Yadav was an 18-year-old Indian soldier during the Kargil War in 1999, when his unit was assigned to capture a strategic peak held by Pakistani forces. His entire team was killed by machine gun fire on the cliff face. He continued climbing alone under fire, was hit by 3 bullets, reached the top, destroyed a bunker with grenades, and killed 4 Pakistani soldiers in hand-to-hand combat before collapsing from his wounds. He was initially reported killed in action. His recommendation for the Paramveer Chakra, India's highest military honor, was submitted posthumously. He survived. He was 19 years old when he received the award. The citation describes his actions as an act of most conspicuous bravery. The description is accurate and also insufficient. 16. Queen Nzinga of the Mbundu people of Angola spent nearly 40 years outmaneuvering, fighting, and negotiating against the Portuguese Empire. She personally led her troops into battle, dressed as a male warrior well into her 60s. She formed military alliances with Dutch forces, organized resistance networks, offered sanctuary to escaped slaves, and created a state that survived Portuguese pressure for decades through a combination of military resistance and diplomatic sophistication that contemporary European observers found genuinely baffling. The Portuguese repeatedly tried to neutralize her through negotiation, conversion, and military force. None of it worked for long. She ruled until her death at around 80 years old, which in 17th century Angola, under constant colonial military pressure, was an extraordinary achievement in itself. 17. Horatius Cucullas was a Roman soldier who in 508 BC held the Pons Sublicius Bridge over the Tiber River alone against the entire Etruscan army, while Roman engineers demolished it behind him. The army of Lars Porsena had routed the Roman forces and was advancing on the city. Horatius took position at the bridge with 2 companions, then sent them back and held alone until the bridge collapsed into the river. He then jumped into the Tiber in full armor and swam to the Roman bank under a hail of javelins. Whether he survived this in ancient sources depends on which account you read. Rome honored him with a bronze statue in the Forum and gave him as much land as he could plow in a single day. He held a bridge against an army, and Rome gave him a field. It was apparently considered a fair exchange. 18. Alvin York was a Tennessee marksman and devout Christian who filed for conscientious objector status when drafted in 1917 because his faith prohibited killing. His application was denied. He went to France anyway, wrestled privately with his conscience, and on October 8, 1918, found himself in the Argonne Forest when his patrol was ambushed and most of his officers were killed. What followed was one of the most remarkable individual combat actions in American military history. He killed 28 German soldiers with rifle and pistol fire, many of them using his turkey shooting technique of targeting the rearmost man first so the others would not see their comrades fall. He then walked 132 prisoners back to Allied lines. He was promoted to sergeant and awarded the Medal of Honor. He spent the rest of his life trying to stay out of the spotlight and build schools in Tennessee. 19. Shaka Zulu inherited a small clan in 1816 and within a decade had built the most feared military force in southern Africa. His innovations were fundamental. He replaced the long throwing spear with a short stabbing assegai designed for close combat, introduced the chest and horns formation that surrounded and destroyed enemies before they could retreat, and personally demonstrated every technique he demanded from his warriors. He fought in single combat against rival clan champions to establish his authority in the early years. His army did not just defeat opponents, it absorbed them, trained them, and expanded. He transformed the military culture of an entire region in under a decade. He was assassinated by his half-brothers in 1828. The Zulu kingdom he built survived him for 50 years and required the full force of the British Empire to finally defeat. Dirk Vlug was a Filipino-American soldier from Grand Rapids, Michigan, who on December 15, 1944, on Leyte Island in the Philippines, encountered a column of 5 Japanese tanks advancing on his position with no anti-tank support available. He picked up a rocket launcher, went forward alone, and destroyed all 5 tanks in a single action without support. He was not ordered to do this. He assessed the situation, determined that the tanks would destroy his unit if not stopped, and stopped them himself. He received the Medal of Honor. His citation describes the action in precise military language that makes it sound almost routine. 5 tanks, 1 man, 1 rocket launcher, no support. His name appears in almost no popular history of World War II. He destroyed 5 tanks alone, and history essentially forgot he existed. 21 Tecumseh was a Shawnee leader who in the early 19th century attempted something no Native American leader had achieved before: building a unified confederacy of tribes across the entire eastern half of North America to resist American expansion. He did it almost entirely through personal diplomacy, oratory, and combat reputation. He traveled thousands of miles, spoke to dozens of tribes, and argued that no single tribe had the right to sell land that belonged to all of them. William Henry Harrison, who would later become president, described him as one of those uncommon geniuses who spring up occasionally to produce revolutions. Tecumseh died at the Battle of the Thames in 1813, fighting alongside British forces. He was in his mid-40s. The confederacy he had built dissolved without him. His death removed the only figure who might have held it together. 22 El Cid was the greatest military commander of medieval Spain, a mercenary knight who fought for both Christian and Muslim rulers depending on circumstance, and won every significant engagement of his career. He was so feared that when he died during the siege of Valencia in 1099, his wife Jimena reportedly had his body dressed in armor, strapped to his horse Babieca, and led out of the city gates toward the besieging Almoravid army. The sight of El Cid apparently riding to battle caused the Almoravid forces to break and flee before anyone realized he was dead. The story appears in medieval chronicles and may be embellished but has been repeated for 9 centuries because it captures something true about the man: that his reputation was a weapon that outlasted his body. Valencia held for 2 more years after his death. 23 Roland was the greatest knight of Charlemagne's court, who in 778 AD commanded the rear guard of the Frankish army retreating through the mountain pass at Roncevaux in the Pyrenees. The pass was ambushed by Basque forces. Roland carried the legendary horn Oliphant, which could be heard miles away, and would have summoned Charlemagne's main force to their relief. He refused to blow it. Blowing the horn would have admitted he needed help, which his pride would not allow. He fought until almost all his men were dead, finally blew the horn so hard he burst the blood vessels in his temples, and died before Charlemagne could return. The story became the Song of Roland, one of the oldest and most important works of French literature. He died because he was too proud to ask for help. The French made him a national hero for it. 24 Bahánzín was the last independent king of the Kingdom of Dahomey in present-day Benin, who fought French colonial forces in 1890 and 1892 with everything he had, including his most extraordinary military asset, the Agoji, an elite corps of female warriors who had served the Dahomey kings for 2 centuries. The Agoji were not symbolic. They were the most disciplined and feared fighters in the kingdom, trained from childhood in combat, hardened through deliberate physical conditioning, and reported by French soldiers to fight with a ferocity that exceeded the male warriors beside them. They charged French positions armed with machetes and muskets, against modern rifles and artillery. They died in enormous numbers. Bahánzín was eventually captured and exiled. The Agoji were disbanded. Their story was largely erased from Western history until recently. 25 Jan Žižka was a Bohemian military commander who lost his first eye in battle as a young man and his second eye during the Hussite Wars in 1421. He continued commanding his army blind, directing battles through subordinates who described terrain and troop movements to him in real time. He never lost a single engagement before or after losing his sight. He developed mobile fortress tactics using armored wagons called war wagons that were so effective they influenced European military thinking for a century. He died of plague in 1424, still undefeated, while on campaign. His soldiers reportedly skinned his body and made a drum from his skin so he could continue leading them into battle after death. Whether they actually did this is disputed by historians. His soldiers believed they did. That belief is its own kind of evidence about the man. 26 Minamoto no Tamatomo was a Japanese archer of the Heian period whose physical abilities were so extraordinary that contemporary chronicles describe his left bow arm as several inches longer than his right from years of training. During the Hogan Rebellion of 1156, he reportedly shot a single arrow through the hull of an enemy ship at the waterline, causing it to take on water and sink. The claim appears in the Hogan Monogatari, a medieval chronicle that mixes history with legend. What is historically documented is that Tamatomo was considered so dangerous after his defeat and capture that his captors cut the tendons in his bow arm rather than execute him, a punishment specifically designed to destroy what made him lethal. He reportedly retrained his other arm and continued. He was eventually exiled to the island of Oshima, where later chronicles say he lived out his days and possibly founded the royal lineage of the Ryukyu kingdom. 27 Agansing Rai was a Gurkha corporal serving in Burma in June 1944 when his company was pinned down by two Japanese machine gun positions that were killing his men and could not be suppressed by supporting fire. He stood up and charged alone. He attacked the first position, killed the crew, turned the machine gun on the second position, then closed with the second position and killed its crew with his kukri in hand-to-hand combat. Then he reorganized his section and led them against a third position. The total action killed approximately 28 Japanese soldiers. He received the Victoria Cross. His citation notes that his outstanding bravery and superb kukri work were an inspiration to his comrades. The phrase kukri work appears in military citations with a specificity that requires no elaboration for anyone familiar with what a Gurkha carries into close combat. 28 William Marshall was born the fourth son of a minor English noble, with no land, no money, and no prospects. He became the greatest knight in medieval Europe through tournament fighting, which in the 12th century was a full-contact sport where knights captured opponents for ransom and could be killed. He fought in over 500 recorded tournaments and individual combats without ever being killed or permanently defeated, accumulating enough ransom wealth to establish himself as a significant figure. He served 5 English kings, was appointed regent of England at the age of 72, and led an army into battle at 73, personally unhorsing a young knight during a skirmish. He died in his bed at around 75, which for a professional fighter of the medieval era was an almost supernatural achievement. When he was dying, he reportedly said he had never in his life done anything of which he was ashamed. Nobody who knew his record challenged the claim. 29 Tuodros Tsikid was an Ethiopian emperor who had fought his way from banditry to the throne through personal combat and extraordinary force of will, unifying a fractured country through military campaigns he led personally from the front. When the British Expeditionary Force came for him in 1868 following a diplomatic dispute over prisoners, it brought 13,000 soldiers, 26,000 support personnel, and 44 elephants to carry artillery through the mountains. At the Battle of Magdala, his army was destroyed by modern artillery and rifles his forces could not match. He retreated to his fortress. He was offered honorable terms of surrender. He refused. He dressed in his finest robes, walked to the gate of the fortress, and shot himself with a pistol that Queen Victoria had given him as a diplomatic gift. He was found dead at the gate. He had decided how his story would end. 30 Lone Man was a Mandan warrior whose story survives through the oral histories of the Mandan people and early accounts by European observers who documented Plains Indian cultures in the 19th century. During a massive Lakota and Arikara raid on the Mandan village of Midutanka, Lone Man reportedly held the village gate alone against the attacking force long enough for the village defenders to organize a resistance. The accounts vary in detail in the way oral histories do, but agree on the core fact: one man at a gate, an overwhelming attacking force, and a defense that held. The Mandan were a small nation surrounded by larger and often hostile neighbors, and their survival required exactly this kind of individual courage at critical moments. Lone Man's stand is not in any Western history textbook. It exists in the memory of a people who remember their own history regardless of whether anyone else does. 31 Huang Zhang was a Chinese general serving Liu Bei during the Three Kingdoms period, who at an age most contemporary sources suggest was over 70, personally led the charge at the Battle of Hanzhong in 219 AD, and killed the enemy commander Shihao Yuan in single combat. He was so old that his subordinates initially refused to follow him into the assault, convinced he was too aged to survive it. He rode ahead anyway. His charge broke the enemy formation, and the resulting victory gave Liu Bei control of Hanzhong, a strategically critical territory. He is listed as one of the 5 Tiger Generals of Shu, the highest military honor in the kingdom. He died the following year in battle, still fighting at an age when most men of his era had been dead for decades. He is remembered in Chinese culture as the archetype of the warrior who grows more dangerous as he ages. 32 Menelik II of Ethiopia faced an Italian colonial force at the Battle of Adwa in March 1896 that believed it was going to conduct a routine colonial pacification operation. Italy had modern rifles, artillery, and the unshaken confidence of a European power dealing with an African nation. Menelik assembled the largest army ever gathered on the African continent at that time, over 100,000 soldiers, and personally directed the battle that followed. The Italian army was destroyed. Over 6,000 Italian soldiers were killed, 1,500 wounded, and 3,000 captured. It was the largest defeat of a European colonial army by an African force in history. The news reached Europe like a shockwave. Adwa ended Italian ambitions in Ethiopia for 40 years. It made Menelik a figure of international significance, and Ethiopia a symbol of African resistance that influenced independence movements across the continent for the next half-century. 33 Gazar of Ling is the central figure of the Epic of King Gazar, the world's longest epic poem at over 20 million words, which has been transmitted orally across Tibet, Mongolia, and Central Asia for centuries. Whether a historical Gazar existed is debated by scholars. What is documented is that his story, a warrior king of superhuman ability who fought demons, rival kings, and cosmic enemies alone and in battle, became the defining narrative of heroism across an enormous geography and cultural range. Bards called Grungpas could recite portions of the epic in trance states, accessing stories they claim to receive rather than remember. The epic is still being performed and extended. New episodes have been recorded in living memory. Whether Gazar was a real man who became a legend, or a legend who was always a legend, his story has outlasted every historical empire that arose in the region he supposedly ruled. 34 Henry Johnson's story has already been told in this video. So in its place here is the story of Corporal Domingo Monteverde, a Spanish soldier during the Peninsular War, who in 1809 was cut off from his unit during a French advance and spent 3 days moving through French-occupied territory alone, killing French sentries with a knife to avoid using his rifle and giving away his position. He reached Spanish lines, having killed 11 men silently over 72 hours while evading a force of thousands. His account was recorded by his commanding officer and submitted as part of a regimental action report. He received a field promotion. His name appears in one archive in Seville and nowhere else. He killed 11 men with a knife over 3 days to get home, and history filed him under miscellaneous. 35 Crazy Horse appears twice in this video because his story has two separate things to say. The first time his name appeared, it was about what he did at Little Bighorn. This time it is about what it cost him. He watched his people starve. He watched the buffalo disappear. He watched children die of diseases the reservation brought with it. He surrendered not because he was defeated, but because continuing to fight meant watching his people die. He was promised safety. He was offered a command position. He was then arrested on suspicion of planning resistance. He was taken to a guardhouse at Fort Robinson. When he realized he was being imprisoned, he struggled. A soldier bayoneted him. He died that night. He was told his father could bury him. His parents took his body and buried it somewhere on the plains, in a location they never disclosed. Nobody knows where Crazy Horse is buried. He made sure of that himself. 36 Diprasad Pun appears here again because his story deserves to end the video. Not because the tripod throw is the most dramatic moment in this list, it is not. But because it is the most honest. Every warrior in this video had a moment when everything ran out. The arrows, the ammunition, the allies, the options. Leonidas ran out of time. Crazy Horse ran out of choices. Roland ran out of pride too late. Simo Hehe ran out of half his face. What Diprasad Pun did when he ran out of ammunition was pick up the nearest object and throw it at the man trying to kill him. It worked. He is alive. He became a British citizen. He raises his children in a country that did not exist in his imagination when he was fighting alone in the dark in Helmand province with a tripod in his hand. Sometimes the story ends there. Sometimes that is enough. One man, one weapon. Sometimes no weapon at all. If this made you feel something, subscribe. The next video goes even deeper into the people history tried to forget.